Agrarian Reform Secretary Virgilio de los Reyes avoids a confrontation with activists calling for his resignation. Bishops are joining the fray as they criticize de los Reyes for the slow distribution of land under the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program.
Seen as they stormed the press conference of Agrarian Reform Secretary Virgilio de los Reyes. De los Reyes tried to dial down the tension by leaving the venue, but frustration boiled over when the DAR Secretary's lawyer challenged the protesters.
Pinaasa niya magbibigyan ng certificate of land o nasitawan. Ngunit ang nangyari ay hindi po totoo at hindi po kami nakakatanggap.
The Department of Agrarian Reform, of course, land distribution. Natapos na yung CARP, natapos yung CARPER, mga reincarnations ng land reform law. Now, how much land is still up for distribution under your watch?
Well, 70% of the poverty nandoon sa agricultural sector. They don't own a land. The land reform was ifar, not because it was not given, or indeed there was really a ceremony to do that, but the problem again is that there was no support. Binigyan mo ng tag-ilan? 2, 3, 5 hectares land reform, tapos ibigay mo sa tao.
For decades in the Philippines, land allocation has been a major concern. However, in recent years, population growth and the degradation of fertile land have resulted in rising stress and conflicts between small farmers, wealthier landowners, and the government.
The agrarian system in the Philippines has been characterized by an increasing concentration of land ownership since the colonization of the country in the 16th century. The colonial system favored huge agricultural estates over small-scale farming, causing native farmers' livelihoods to be disrupted. In the period prior to the conquest of Spain, this land is ours. God has given it to us. Filipinos live in villages or barangays ruled by the chiefs or datus before the Spaniards arrived.
The nobility were made up of the datus. The maharli caste or freemen arrived next, followed by the aliping mamamahay or serfs and aliping sagigilid or slaves. Despite the existence of diverse socio-economic strata, virtually everyone had access to the fruits of the earth. Rice was used as a form of payment because money was unavailable.
Agriculture is the foundation of manufacturers, since the productions of nature are the materials of art, by Edward Gibbon. What is agrarian? Agrarian, a term which refers to the economy of a community or society, which their foundation is to produce, generate, and yields for crops and farmland. A production based on agricultural products that supplies the needs of every individuals. It is oath for farming and agriculture to work in cultivating the land as a means of livelihood, as existed way back from the pre-colonial period up until the present. It denotes the worsening situations of the Filipinos face in the farmland, since it can grow crops and many other agricultural products that sustains the needs and necessities we have as a human.
What does agrarian reform means? Agrarian reform refers to the established institution of the government that introduces to the agricultural land redistribution that is lucidly and equivalent to the general deflection of the agrarian system of the country, which includes the land measures. Agrarian reform or land reform has traditionally been limited to land redistribution. However, in a broader sense, it encompasses reforms in agricultural institutions such as credit, taxation, rentals, and cooperatives. Although agrarian reform can affect agricultural output, especially if it includes collectivization when land reallocated to the tiller, it can also boost productivity. The push for modern land reform is strongest in the developing countries.
The following 5 dimensions are the ways on how the World Bank evaluates agrarian reforms. First, stock and market liberalization. Second, land reform, including the development of land markets. Third, agro-processing and input supply channels. Fourth, urban finance. And lastly, market institutions.
According to the United Nations Thesaurus, they defined agrarian reform as a component of agricultural economics and policy, with a specific impact on rural sociology and broader than land reform.
As the years passed, the country's history, in accordance with the agrarian reforms in the Philippines, is vast and unstable and harmful since we were under the governance of other countries that demands, violate, and thus unlikely things that will benefit and get their needs while Filipinos are treated with unfairness. There were laws enacted to improve and give prior consciousness to holistically benefit and profit equally, either in the production or profit sharing, labor administration, and the distribution of shares of stocks.
In the period of Spain, they believe that we are stronger when we are united, but we are weaker when we are separated. Encomienda was first introduced in the Philippines by the Spaniards. The encomendero gained the right to collect tribute from the Indians as a result of this. The tribute soon turned into land rents for a few wealthy landowners. The indigenous people were reduced to share tenants. In the First Philippine Republic, the yoke has finally come undone. General Emilio Aguinaldo announced in the Malolos Constitution, and the First Philippine Republic was created in 1899, that he intended to confiscate vast estates, particularly those belonging to Catholics. His plan, however, was never carried out since the Republic was short-lived and his plan never materialized.
The American Era. Long live the United States of America. During the American period, significant legislation was passed, including the Philippine Bill of 1902, sets limits on the amount of land that private persons and businesses can own. The Land Registration Act of 1902, or also known as Act Number 496, established a tolerance system for registering land titles. Public Land Act of 1903 established the Philippine Homestead System. During the Commonwealth period, as Filipino government. During the Commonwealth period in 1936 to 1947, the Philippines President Manuel L. Quezon advocated for the social justice program to address the rising socio-economic discontent in Central Luzon. The National Rice and Corn Corporation, or NARIC, was founded in 1936 to set the price of rice and corn, thereby assisting both renters and consumers. The Commonwealth Act is a piece of legislation enacted by number 461 in 1937, specified justifications for evicting tenants, which could only be done with permissions of Department of Justice's Tenancy Division. During the Japanese occupation, as Hukbalahap's era, peasant and worker organizations increased in the prominence after the Japanese arrived in the Philippines in 1942. Many peasants took up arms and joined the anti-Japanese Hukbalahap or Hukbo ng Bayan laban sa Hapon. The end of World War II meant the end of the Hooks, but it also brought an end to their struggles against landlords who supported the Japanese.
The Philippines has a long history of unequal land tenure. Large private estates dominated the rural landscape from the Spanish colonial period from 1565 to 1898. Farmers worked the land under sharecropping agreements with no freedom to choose the crops they grew or the option to own the land they worked. By 1980, 60% of the agricultural population was landless, with many of them poor. To address this pervasive land tenure inequality, the Congress passed the Agrarian Reform Law in 1988
and the CARP was implemented to improve the lives of small farmers, providing them with land tenure security and support services. The Philippines Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program, or CARP, is expected to help around 750,000 people to improve land tenure security and stable property rights through a new project that will facilitate land titles for over 1.3 million hectares of land. CARP has distributed 4.8 million hectares, which is 16% of the nation's land, to nearly 3 million beneficiaries over the last 3 decades. However, only about 53% of the lands distributed were in the form of individual titles. The government issued mostly collective land ownership awards, especially in the 1990s, to speed up land distribution, with the intention of subdividing and titling them individually later. Support to parcelization of lands for individual titling project or split is intended to expedite the subdivision of collective certificates of land ownership award and the generation of individual titles on lands awarded under the CARP. The Philippine government has recently renewed its push for individual titling in order to accelerate rural transformation. The split project, implemented by the Department of Agrarian Reform or DAR, will support the government's ongoing efforts for parcelization and individual titling through the adoption of improved technologies and digital platforms, regulatory improvements, streamlining of titling procedures, and enhanced consultations with beneficiaries.
The New Republic. After the establishment of the Philippine independence in 1946, the problems of land tenure remained. This became worse in certain areas. Thus, the Congress of the Philippines revised the tenancy law. President Manuel A. Rojas enacted the following laws. Republic Act No. 34 established the 70 to 30 sharing arrangements and regulating shared tenancy contracts. And Republic Act No. 55 provided for a more effective safeguard against arbitrary injectment of tenants. Enacted the following law. Executive No. 355, issued on October 23, 1950, replaced the National Land Settlement Administration with Land Settlement Development Corporation, which takes over the responsibilities of the Agricultural Machinery Equipment Corporation and the Rice and Corn Production Administration. Ramon Magsaysay enacted the following laws. Republic Act No. 1160 of 1954 abolished the LASEDECO and established the National Resettlement and Rehabilitation Administration, or NARA, to resettle descendants and landless farmers. It was particularly aimed at tribal returnees, providing home lots and farmlands in Palawan and Mindanao. Republic Act No. 1199, or Agricultural Tenancy Act of 1954, governed the relationship between landowners and tenants farmers by organizing shared tenancy and leasehold system. The law provided the security of tenure of tenants. It also created the Court of Agrarian Relations. Republic Act No. 1400, or Land Reform Act of 1955, created the Land Tenure Administration, or LTA, which was responsible for the acquisition and distribution of large tenanted rice and corn lands, over 200 hectares of individuals and 600 hectares of corporations. Republic Act No. 821, or Creation of Agricultural Credit Cooperative Financing Administration, provided small farmers and share tenants loans with low interest rates of 6 to 8%. President Carlos Garcia continued the program of President Ramon Magsaysay and no new legislation passed. President Diosdado P. Macapagal enacted the following law. Republic Act No. 3844 of August 8, 1963, or Agricultural Land Reform Code, abolished shared tenancy, institutionalized leasehold, set retention limit at 75 hectares, invested rights of preemption and redemption for tenant farmers, provided for an administrative machinery for implementation, institutionalized a judicial system of agrarian cases, incorporated extension, marketing, and supervised credit system of services of farmers' beneficiaries. The RA was hailed as one that would emancipate Filipino farmers from the bondage of tenancy. President Ferdinand E. Marcos, Proclamation number 1081 on September 21, 1972, ushered the period of the new society. 5 days after the proclamation of martial law, the entire country was proclaimed a land reform area, and simultaneously the agrarian reform was decreed. President Marcos enacted the following laws: Republic Act No. 6389 or Code of Agrarian Reform and RA No. 6390 of 1971 created the Department of Agrarian Reform and the Agrarian Reform Special Account Fund. It strengthened the position of the farmers and expanded the scope of agrarian reform. Presidential Decree No. 2, September 26, 1972, declared the country under Land Reform Program. It enjoined all agencies and offices of the government to extend full cooperation and assistance to the DAR. It also activated the Agrarian Reform Coordinating Council. Presidential Decree No. 27, October 21, 1972, restricted land reform scope to tenanted rice and corn lands and set the retention limit at 7 hectares. President Corazon Aquino enacted the following laws. Executive Order No. 228, July 16, 1987, declared full ownership to qualified farmer beneficiaries covered by PD 27. It also determined the value remaining unvalued rice and corn lands subject to Presidential Decree 27 and provided for the manner of payment by the FBs and mode of compensation to landowners. Executive No. 229, July 22, 1987, provided mechanism for the implementation of the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program. Proclamation No. 131, July 22, 1987, instituted the CARP as the major program of the government. It provided for a special fund known as the Agrarian Reform Fund, or ARF, with an initial amount of 50 billion pesos to cover the estimated cost of the program from 1987 to 1992. Executive Order No. 129, July 26, 1987, streamlined and expanded the power and operations of the DAR. Republic Act No. 6657, June 10, 1988, or Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law, an act which became effective June 15, 1988, and instituted a comprehensive agrarian reform program to promote social justice and industrialization, providing the mechanism for its implementation and for other purposes. This law is still the one being implemented at present. Executive Order No. 405, June 14, 1990, vested in the Land Bank of the Philippines the responsibility to determine land valuation and compensation for all lands covered by CARP. Executive Order No. 407, June 14, 1990, accelerated the acquisition and distribution of agricultural lands, pasture lands, fish ponds, agroforestry lands, and other lands of the public domain suitable for agriculture. President Fidel V. Ramos enacted the following laws. Republic Act No. 7881, 1995, amended certain provisions of RA 6657 and exempted fish ponds and prawns from the coverage of CARP. Republic Act No. 7905, 1995, strengthened the implementation of the CARP. Executive Order Number 363/1997 limits the type of lands that may be converted by setting conditions, under which limits the type of lands that may be converted by setting conditions under which specific categories of agricultural land are either absolutely non-negotiable for conversion or highly restricted for conversion. Republic Act No. 8435/1997 or Agriculture and Fisheries Modernization Act plugged the legal loopholes in land use conversion. Republic Act 8532/1998 Agrarian Reform Fund Bill provided an additional $50 million for CARB and extended its implementation for another 10 years. President Joseph Estrada initiated the enactment of the following law. Executive Order Number 151, September 1999, Farmers Trust Fund allowed the voluntary consolidation of small farm operation into medium and large-scale integrated enterprise that can access long-term capital. President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo is anchored on the vision to make the countryside economically viable for the Filipino family by building partnership and promoting social equity and new economic opportunities toward lasting peace and sustainable rural development. President Benigno III vowed during his 2012 State of the Nation address that he would complete before the end of his term the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program or CARP, the centerpiece program of the administration of his mother, President Corazon Aquino. Under his administration, the Agrarian Reform Community Connectivity and Economic Support Services project was created to contribute to the overall goal of the rural poverty reduction, especially in agrarian reform areas. Agrarian Production Credit Program provided credit support for crop production to newly organized and existing agrarian reform beneficiaries. Organization and farmers' organization not qualified to avail themselves of loans under the regular credit windows of banks. President Rodrigo Roa Duterte is the current president of the Philippines. Under his leadership, the president wants to pursue an aggressive land reform program that would help elevate the life of poor Filipino farmers by prioritizing the provision of support services alongside land distribution. The president directed the DAR to launch the second phase of agrarian reform, where landless farmers would be awarded with undistributed lands under the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program. Duterte plans to place almost all public lands, including military reserves, under agrarian reform. The president also placed 400 hectares of agricultural lands in Boracay under CARP. Under his administration, the DAR created an anti-corruption task force to investigate and handle reports on alleged anomalous activities by officials and employees of the department. The department also pursued an Upland Zero backlog in the resolution of cases in relation to agrarian justice, delivery of the Agrarian Reform Program for fast track of implementation of CARP.
Ways on how to improve the Agrarian Reform Program in the country. We all know that there's a lot of improvements needed before the country's agricultural sector achieve its full potential. So, it would be better if policies and projects will also focus on the priority areas that can boost the stability of the sector and improvement of the reform program. To improve the agrarian reform programs in the country, first, we should encourage investments in agriculture that benefit local communities. There will no longer be a concern of being left behind if each location in the Philippines is targeted through unique development plans. Each facet will be exploited, resulting in more inclusive agricultural development and eventually economic development. Second, make initiatives that will boost and maintain productivity a top priority. If agricultural workers' productivity improves, a slew of new chances for growth will open up. However, increasing productivity should not be limited to one or two components. It should encompass the entire supply chain from manufacturing to distribution. Third, invest programs that will help people become more resilient to climate change, natural disasters, pests, and diseases. Farmers used to only deal with pests and diseases, as well as typhoons every now and then. But as time passed by, climate change has added to the load that has hindered the sector's progress. Fourth, increasing smallholders' agricultural productivity. By improving the efficiency of agricultural input, service production and delivery, as well as supporting value chains. Led by farmers' associations and the private sector that deliver new technologies, extension and advisory services, and market innovations to small and large-scale farmers. Lastly, we should prioritize our farmers. At the end of the day, while implementing agricultural programs and initiatives, the well-being and the welfare of the farmers should be prioritized. They are, after all, the primary food producers in the country. As a country where rice is essential, we can't afford to lose our farmers. Their lack of production can lead to food insecurity. Therefore, we conclude that a good economy in the Philippines and development in rural areas in the provinces can be achieved by changing the agrarian reform system. Having an improvement and development of program will lead to a successful agrarian reform. We all know that many lives have been lost. Many lives have been risked for this change. So here I am, together with my group mates, shouting, "Let's continue the fight for the agrarian reform."